This conference will now be recorded.
Good morning, friends. Welcome to GoOnlineTrainings.com. We know what is a view. We know what is a stored procedure. We know what is a function, right? So, view is nothing but a single query, right? If sometimes the customer asks you, I wanted to show you the customers of branch BR1. It is simply a view. Or I wanted to show only the female candidates where gender equals to male, right? So all these are query requirements are simply a views and a single query. And when should I go in for a store procedure or a function? So if you wanted to insert the data, update the data, write a programming, and that is when you can go in for a store procedure. And the functions, you can only read the data and implement some kind of a calculations on that. Functions cannot insert or update or delete the data into the tables. Clear? So most of the time you use store procedures only, and views are nothing but a queries, right? And you have functions. Functions are rarely used only for the computation purpose. One example I quoted yesterday, to get the seat numbers. Okay. So that is where we can use a function I wanted to call as part of my store procedures or elsewhere. Or if you wanted to have a parameters to the views, then you can bring for a function. Otherwise, 80 to 90% of the time when you join the company, people are going to be asking you to work on the store procedures only. You know how to create a table, how to drop a table, all these things already you know. So much more time you will be asked what is the difference between store procedure and function, and OLTP versus OLAP, or people may ask you what is a primary key versus a unique key, or what is the foreign key, what is the data modeling. So what is one-to-one relationship, what is one-to-m relationship, what is many-to-many relationships, right? And can you give me one complex store procedure that you have written recently, right? And do you know queries very well? Do you know joins very well? So these are the questions in the interview that are asked. Clear? If you wanted to attend the interview, make sure that you know queries very well. Make sure that you know store procedures very well. Make sure that you know indexes very well. So these are the top three topics that you have to always go before the interview. Definitely, you will get more and more questions from this topic, and 80 to 90% of interview questions I have covered in my videos. You need not go any YouTube videos. So follow my videos and go through them and do the case studies. You will be able to solve at least 90% of interview questions. 10% they may ask out of their experience, that you may not be able to answer them even though you have 20 or 30 years of experience. Doesn't matter. So 10% questions you will not be able to answer, but when you go in for MSBA interview, compulsorily you should know SQL very well. Many people nowadays joining Power BI with me, and they're joining the companies without having SQL knowledge. Now they have to come back to me, and again they say that, sir, because of SQL I'm not able to perform the job very well. I lost my job. So many people do not know that if they know Power BI, it is not guaranteed that they get a job. If they know MSBA, it is not guaranteed that they'll have a job. They may be having a job. It is very, very difficulty for them to get into IT industry and sustain there. Am I clear? So you advise all the people and tell them that MSBA, Power BI, or data science needs proper SQL knowledge. Without that, it is very, very difficult for them to get into the IT industry. Now, okay, so why views, why store procedures, why functions means to centralize the code. Why centralization? Reusability purpose. Why centralization? Reusability purpose. Why centralization? It is reusability purpose. That's what we should understand. Okay. Now, why triggers? People may ask you these questions. Why triggers? Triggers are nothing but it is used for the validations purpose. Okay. Before understanding triggers, we have to understand a concept called what is the need for the trigger, what are the types of the triggers we have, and what are the features of the triggers that we need to discuss. But before understanding need for the trigger, you have to know what is the purpose of a check constraint. What is the purpose of a check constraint? The purpose is to validate the data. For example, gender can be either male or female. How do you validate the data? With the help of a check constraint, right? Or salary cannot be negative. How do you say salary greater than zero? Or grade column can have grade of the employee can be A grade or B grade or C grade. So how do you write? You have to write a check constraint there. Clear? So you may have a column level check constraint. Why check constraint? To validate the data, right? Why primary key? To ensure that there is no duplicate so data is not there, right? So why null? There is no null is allowed in that column. Like that, the purpose of check constraint is to validate the simple simple validation. For example, gender can be either male or female, salary greater than zero, and age of the employee not greater than 60 years. For example, you are joining in the company and the company has a limit, age limit. The employee age should not be greater than 60, or should not be less than 20. So that is the age limit that they wanted to have it. So you should be able to create a small check constraint. Employee ID, employee name, employee age. So what is that? Our employee date of birth. So inside the employee date of birth, you should be able to write an expression. What is the expression you write? So the date, age difference, okay? Age difference between, so 20 to 60, something like that. So that is a check constraint. So multiple constraints per column can be given. So we know already this concept. We have also created a lot of check constraints as part of our school case study, supplier case study, and iBank case studies. Clear? Even though the classes are getting over, guys, does not mean that you should stop, doing the case studies. Clear? So you please, complete school and supplier case study, and we'll have one review session for those case studies as well. Clear? We'll set up a meeting and we'll do the case studies. And you must complete school and supplier without fail. Clear? And then go to the iBank. So now, what are the limitations of the check constraint? It will allow following operators. So you can have in operator equals to greater than, salary greater than zero, or greater than or equals to zero. Something like this you can write. Does not support the programming constructs like if and else, loops, variables. It always works within the same table, cannot work across the table. For example, I wanted to validate based on two tables. Okay, I have two tables. I have to validate, some data across the tables. That a check constraint cannot do it. Clear? You check constraint when the requirement is simple, else use triggers. Check constraints are fast in the performance, triggers are slow in the performance. Now you should understand, use check constraint when the requirement is simple, else use triggers. What check constraint is doing? It is validating the data whenever you insert, whenever you update, whenever you delete. Validations are done by the check constraint. So for the simple requirement, check constraints are used to validate the data. Else use trigger means triggers also used to validate the data. What is the purpose of a trigger? to validate the data when the check constraint cannot do it work. Complex validation, when it cannot do it, that is when we're going to be using a trigger. You have a police and you have an army. So what is the purpose of a police? If there is a small theft is going on, small accident is happened, then you call a police. But one country is attacking one more country, a terrorist attack is going on. Will you call police? No, you need to have the army, a force there. So both of them are there to safeguard the people, right? But end of the day, for the simple requirement, for example, you lost your laptop, you go to the police and give a complaint, right? But there's a terrorist attack, even though you give a complaint to the police, but police cannot act. There is a country is attacking one more country, police cannot go there. So complex attacks will be taken care by army, air force, defense people. Small attacks, small attacks, a robbery is going on, a accident is happened, then police is come. Clear? When the police cannot do its work, then there is a army, air force, navy, something like this. But the complex requirements, you should go for the triggers, simple requirements, simple validations. For example, salary greater than zero. Age cannot be more than 60 or less than 20. Grade can be either A grade or B grade or C grade. Or gender can be either male or female. All these things can be achieved with the help of check constraints. Clear? And for the complex requirements, you must go in for the triggers. And if you wanted to check the data across the tables, validation is to happen across the table means you have to use triggers. Now you tell me, what is the purpose of a trigger or what is the need of a trigger? The trigger need is to validate the data. Clear? The complex validations. I'll give you few more examples for the complex validations. Now, check constraint and the triggers both will validate the data during the DML operations. Means when the insert happens, the trigger gets fired, the check consent gets fired, and it will validate the data. When insert, update, delete happens. Use check constraints when the requirement is simple, else go for a trigger. Check constraints example, salary cannot be negative. Trigger example is a customer cannot withdraw more than 40,000 rupees or dollars per day using ATM machine. Clear? So what is the meaning? So you go to the ATM morning and you wanted to withdraw 20,000 rupees. Okay. In India, this is the max limit given a debit card. So morning I went to the bank or the ATM machine, already withdrawn 20,000 rupees. Afternoon again I went to the bank and withdrawn another 20,000 rupees. So morning 20, afternoon 20, 40 is over. Then evening 5 o'clock again I went to the bank ATM machine, I wanted to withdraw another 5,000 rupees. So the machine is saying you have crossed the limit for the day. Thank you. You cannot do the withdrawal operation today. Try after 24 hours or try tomorrow. Something like this. So who's going to give you this validation? This validation is done by the trigger, because the check constraints cannot do that, because here I need to do complex operation. First I need to understand who's the account ID, then I need to understand the date parameter. So date also I need to compare. So account number, date I need to take, and I had to do the sum operations. Morning 20,000 plus afternoon 20,000, and now he's trying to take another 10,000. So total is already exceeded 50, right? So summing operation and comparing the dates and doing all these things cannot be done by the check constraint. Clear? Because check consent simply can say salary greater than zero. If you're giving at a time 45,000, it may tell you you cannot give you 40,000 or more than 40,000. But the customer is not doing as in single transaction. Customer is doing a multiple transaction, morning 20, afternoon 20, evening again 20K, you wanted to get it. So that is not going to happen according to the banking principles or the rules. Clear? So I need to do the complex operation, summing operation and comparing the dates and grouping by account ID. So these things cannot be done with the help of a simple check constraint. Am I clear? So that is where this kind of a validations are going to be done by the triggers. Clear? So you should know what is the purpose of the trigger now. Clear? Triggers are automatically fired. That is also one more thing. So check consent is automatically fired. You are not going to call the check consent. Calling a view, yes. Calling a stored procedure, yes. Calling a function, yes. We never call the trigger. We only create a trigger. We only create a primary key. We only create a foreign key. We only create in all of them. We never call them. I'm calling a primary key now. No, people will laugh at you, right? So you never call a trigger. So trigger you only create and on the table and just leave it. So when the insert happens, when the DML operation happens, especially writing happens, insert update happens, primary key, foreign key, check consent, null, not null, default values, everything will get fired. At the last, triggers also gets fired automatically. Then it's going to validate its data. Clear? So you're not going to be calling a trigger especially. So you cannot call it. So calling a view is done, calling a stored proc is done, calling a function is done, but calling a trigger cannot be done. Clear? So trigger can have a programming. Remember this. Trigger have a programming and a trigger have a variables, a trigger have if and else, a trigger have SQL programming completely you can write. But what you cannot do, trigger cannot be called as part of anything. So it is automatically invoked. So however you're invoking primary key, are you invoking any primary key? No, you insert the data. If there is a duplicate, SQL Server will tell you primary key violation occurs. So who's invoking primary key? You need to only simply create them. That's it. Automatically, it's going to be called. Clear? Triggers you simply create on a tables and leave them. So it is there to validate the data. Clear? So check consents are very, very simple and very, very faster, and triggers are very, very complex and it is bit slow. People may ask you, triggers are performing a complex validation. Can't it do slow operations? For example, you have a defense. They are, they are there to for the complex wars, right? But does not mean that they can also support small robberies and everything. But we never go to the defense or army for the small robberies and everything. Why? Because army people, the weapons are heavy. Their the force is heavy, the guns are heavy. For simple reasons, you will not be able to go to the army, right? You go to the police. So even though triggers can do small operations or small validations, simple validations, but we never use triggers for the simple validations. The better you're going to be going to the check constraint. Salary cannot be negative. Trigger also can do this validation. So the benefit is that triggers, if you implement, they are slow. Clear? I told you a robbery has happened. You're supposed to inform the police, but informing army chief, so they laugh at you, right? For the small things, you can go to the police, but the complex wars and all, you have to go to army, defense, air force, right? So small validations you better try to achieve with the check constraint. If the check constraint are not able to support you, then you can use the triggers there. So creating a trigger is possible. You never call the trigger. Clear? So now you know what is the need for the trigger, right? So need for the trigger is to validate the data. Triggers are automatically fired. Trigger will have programming. Triggers will have all SQL and SQL statements, loops, and everything you can implement over there. Variables and everything you can implement there. Clear? And that is the need for the trigger. Now, check and send faster than the triggers, hence always use a check and send first. If not, then use the triggers. So triggers example, let me give you some more. Account holder in a bank cannot make more than transactions per day. For example, so there is a one more restriction happened in India. Now per month you can max withdraw 3 times. So if you're going for the fourth time, either the transaction is not allowed, or a penalty of $100 or $50 will is cut there. So this is one more rule. So what is this? So given a month's time, what are the transaction, either cash deposit or cash withdrawal? So you can perform only 3 times per month. So that is a rule that you need to implement. So how do you do that? You need to write a trigger there. Now, when the transaction is altered, the difference between the old amount and the new amount cannot be more than 10%. So these are the complex requirement. Transaction can't be made for the closed accounts. And see, we know that we have a table, right? So use iBank. Few of them we need to discuss today very clearly. Select a star from account master table, and we have account ID, name, blah, blah, blah. Then there is status. Status means whether account ID is opened or closed. Clear? So let us update account master and set status is equals to somebody wanted to close their account. So they wanted to say closed, where, for example, this guy wanted to close his account to say 105, where account ID is equivalent to 105. So you will go to the bank and say that I wanted to close my account. He closed it. So after closing it, this account has been closed now, right? Status of 105 account is closed. Okay, now even though account been closed, so now we have one more table. The table name is called a transaction master table. So he went to the, one more bank. He wanted to deposit some cash. Clear? Now he wanted to deposit. So insert into transaction master values. Okay. So how do we deposit? This is automatic number. So this is automatic number. You should not insert the data. In this, we can have today's date. Get date. Okay. And account number is 105. And the cash deposit is doing account number 105 BR1. In branch BR1, he went there. He wanted to do some transaction, cash deposit, null and null. So check number is null and check null, and some 2000 he wanted to make it, and some user ID, one, a bank employee's user number, this is he's doing. So bank employee is doing. Now you're able to insert for the same 10 again. Now you see one row affected. Now according to the program, you are saying he's closed his account. When is the closing his account, how you're able to insert the data? So let me show you his data, right? So how is this happening? The validation supposed to happen, right? Now 804, today transaction is happened for 105 and 2000. So how it is happening? Up software is not at all doing any validations, right? So can you get deposit the cash after closing an account? You cannot. But how it is happening? So it is happening now because there is no validation. The validation is going to be taking place while inserting data into this table. You need to go and check in this table whether this account ID, whatever be the account ID that is being inserted, the same account ID status you need to inquire there. So you have to use, validations across tables. So in this case, check constraints cannot be used. I told you this because you're doing something. Transaction can't be made for the closed accounts. I'm able to do it now because there is a trigger. So it always works within the same table, cannot work across the tables. Check constraints cannot, do the validations. You're inserting the data into transaction master table, and you wanted to validate by going to the account master table whether this account is opened state or closed state. So that you cannot implement with the help of a check constraint, right? So that you need to implement with the trigger. Clear? So otherwise, what happens? You say that I have closed my account. Now you can deposit the account here. So that will be very, very problematic. Clear? So whenever you insert the data, the validation is going to occur or happen in this table. Clear? So from this table to this table, I should go and verify, what is his status, closed or operational. Operational means this can happen, otherwise this cannot happen. Clear? So this is one example across tables I'm talking about, where you have to implement a trigger on this table, because you're going to be inserting the data in this, right? When you're inserting the data in this table, trigger has to be created in this, not in this. So when you're inserting the data, the trigger will get fired. Trigger will go to this table and validate the account, the status for this account. Clear? If it is C, everything is fine. Otherwise, you have to roll it back. Roll it back means whatever you're trying to do, that will get rolled back. So whatever you're trying to insert, this will get failed, saying that you don't have the account is it's not operational, it is closed, something like this. Clear? And you may wonder, few more examples I'll give you for the triggers. Clear? Few more examples I wanted to give you trigger. So you have account master table, and you have account ID and name, and we have talking about C balance, and we have a status column. So a lot of columns are available. So let us take these columns. So 101. So let us say Sneha is open an account today with 0 and operational mode. 102. Let us say Godo5 is open an account today and with it is also operational. Now you do lot of transactions, right? After opening it, there's a transaction master table and account ID, DOT, date of transaction. Then what is the transaction type and what is the transaction amount? Clear? So we have a transaction type here, we have transaction amount here, and a date of DOT. So 101 wanted to deposit, let us say, October 21st and 2020. She has opened an account someday and she wanted to deposit cash deposit of 10,000. Clear? Now, when she is inserting 10,000, who's supposed to go here and update his balance? Somebody has to go there and update the balance, right? So who's going to be doing that? That also can be done by the trigger. Okay. So what is the need for the trigger? There are two things I wanted to tell you. The need for the trigger is, one is called trigger can do validations. Just now I spoke into you. Validations means status should be operational. All these things can be done. One more thing trigger can do, post processing work. Okay. So validations are called as pre-processing. Okay. So pre-processing and post-processing. So this is what is called a validation. If something going on, trigger is going to be doing a validation. And apart from the validation, triggers also can do some post-processing work. These are called jobs. Okay. Some jobs which are going to do. Now, whenever you deposit the cash here, and trigger wanted to verify whether it is a closed account or not. Okay, so that is a validation. So trigger can do, that is a validation trigger can do. But now once everything is properly inserted means, I wanted to know what is the transaction amount here, 10,000. So that 10,000 I supposed to update here. So it is not a validation, it is some extra work the trigger is doing. That's it. Trigger is doing some extra work. Try to understand, because when you have created a trigger on this table, okay, when you create a trigger on this table, when you insert the data, the trigger gets fired. When the trigger gets fired, one thing that it can validate the data. What is the validation? Whether 101 account is open state or closed state. It is open state. That is a validation. But what is the next activity that you have given to the trigger? Hey trigger, you also update this balance. So whoever is depositing the cash, you simply go there and insert. So we are not writing a trigger. So even though you insert the data here, the C balance still zero here. So automatically I should do this activity. Who's going to be doing automatically this? So this is a job also done by the trigger. Now tomorrow 101 wanted to go, and 101 again the next day she wanted to, let us say, withdraw some cash. She will be saying cash withdrawal of 11,000. Now one validation again, whether it is opened account, yes, account is operational, that is true. And the next validation, whether this guy has sufficient balance, does not have sufficient balance, because 10,000 he has and 11,000 he wanted to withdraw, she wanted to withdraw. Now this cannot be happened. So this is one more validation. Trigger only automatically will perform. Clear? So all these things are validation examples. So we never implemented a trigger. So you need to write this code, automation code. You need to write it, because whenever you inserting the data, trigger should tell you there is no sufficient funds in your account. It is a validation. Clear? For example, you are doing a cash deposit of 11,000. Now it will become 21,000, right? So this is a post processing job. 21,000 you will have. This is a post processing job. So next one, Sneha wanted to do again same day cash withdrawal of 5,000. So it is doing two things. One is that status and sufficient balance. Then it is also perfectly fine. There's no problem. If that is happens, so 21,000, 5,000, 21 minus 5K, it will be 16K. Clear? So it is validating, that is what is called pre-processing, and it is also updating your salary. Clear? We never thought about it. So whenever we insert the data, who's going to be updating these columns? So somebody has to do automatically, right? You cannot say I will do it manually. Manually means you may forget sometime. If you forget, what will happen? Inconsistency will come, right? If you insert the data, then you try to update it here, what happens? The inconsistency will come, that automatically I should do it. So automation means triggers only, remember, because views cannot be automated. Views are completely, you need to call manually. And stored procs again manual. If you don't call the stored proc, then gone. Clear? And functions also manually you can call them. But if you wanted to automate something, automate means I am planning to insert something and the validations have to happen automatically, then I'm going to be expecting some kind of a job. Clear? So the job also should be done automatically. Could be, whenever I'm doing whenever I'm doing cash deposits, cash withdrawals, automatically this column should get updated, and the validations, everything need to be implemented automatically. Automation means triggers can be implemented. Clear? But only problem with the triggers is these are a bit slow. So these are a bit slow. They're having programming and everything. Whenever you insert the row, if there is a trigger inside this, the trigger is going to be fired. The trigger is going to be fired automatically. Then it's going to be doing its work. What is the work it has to do? It has to check the validation, one thing, then check for the balance in case of the cash withdrawals. And after that, it has to update the salary. Lot of things a single trigger can do. Clear? So if you ask me, what is the need for a trigger? Pre-processing and post-processing. Pre-processing means validation. I have given you couple of examples for the pre-processing, whether accounts are closed or opened. Okay, accounts, we need to check whether closed or accounts. In case of cash withdrawal, check for the funds availability. Okay, funds availability. So all these things you can implement with the help of a triggers. Triggers are for the more automation purpose. Okay, triggers are for more for what purpose? Automation. You need not do anything. When you insert the data, when you delete the data, automatically triggers are invoked and it is going to be doing its work. So Many people will say trigger is nothing but a stored proc only because the triggers will have a programming, stored proc also will have a programming. Any work, SQL, T-SQL, everything can do in a trigger and the stored proc. But only difference is stored proc need to be called manually, triggers are automatic. That's it, nothing else. Okay. Triggers are similar, similarly, you write as, compared to stored procs only. Okay, so if you give automation to the stored proc, that is a trigger. So that is how the people will say. If you give automation to the stored procedures, you tell them that this is a trigger. Clear? So this is what we should understand always. Am I clear? So now, what is the purpose of a trigger and what is the need for the trigger we understood. So one is called validation, the second one is called jobs, post processing things. Clear? I have given you two examples here. Now, so that's what, okay? Complex business rules, or you wanted to have, one table to another table, you wanted to compare some data. So all these things can be achieved with the help of pre-processing validations. And the post-processing means it can also do some extra job. So this is what is called any DML operations are going on in a different tables. For example, you deposit the cash automatically, my balance need to be updated implicitly. All these are triggers. Clear? So in my iBank case study, in your iBank case study, when you open it, you should be able to get the same thing there. If you open your Indian bank case study, lot of triggers have been, asked. Let me open the case study and show you. These are the tables, right? So I think N1 was asking yesterday. Sir, do we need to create all these as primary key and unique key? Already you have created. Date of transaction and date of opening should be the same as the current day. You need to write a check constraint. A check which is more than 6 months old should not be accepted. This is a check constraint. No transaction should be allowed on accounts marked as inoperative closed. So this is a trigger. Okay. This is a trigger that you need to work on. When the transaction is altered, this is also a trigger. More than three cash withdrawals transaction in a single account on the same day cannot happen, right? More than three cash withdrawal transaction in a single account on the same day should not be allowed. This is also a trigger. More than three cash withdrawal transaction in a single account on the same month should not be allowed. Something like this. This is also okay. So this one, three cash withdrawal. Let us have cash deposit. Let us say something like this. Cash deposits in a single account on the same month should not be allowed. So these are the triggers need to be implemented. Remaining things are check number and check rate column should not be null if the transaction type is a check deposit. A product should not be removed if there are accounts attached to it. Okay, a transaction amount, should not be negative. So this is it. All these are check constraint. Transaction type should be only cash withdrawal, cash deposits, cash, check deposits, which is check constraint, right? An account should not be closed if it is late checks are in the transit mode, something like this. These are check constraint. Uncleared balance should not be lesser than the cleared balance. It is a check constraint. Minimum balance for the savings bank should be, $1,000. So all these are again triggers. All these are check constraint. Okay. So this is a complex case study that you need to work on always. When there is a insert update in the transaction amount for an account, balance clearance and clearance in the account master should be, updated implicitly. Clear? So that meaning is whenever you're doing cash deposit and cash withdrawal, and the same amount has to be updated implicitly here. So that is the requirement. If there is no minimum balance in the account, withdrawal should be prohibited and an appropriate message should be displayed. So you're trying to withdraw, let us say some $50,000 and art, the it should not be allowed. So this is one. If there is no minimum balance in the account, withdrawal should be prohibited and appropriate message should be displayed. So they're talking about funds availability in case of cash withdrawals. So if the transaction amount is greater than 50,000, same should be inserted into high value transaction tables. So a lot of things are triggers only. Total number of transactions per month to be less than 5. If it exceeds rupees 50 to be debited as a penalty. This is a trigger. Okay. So any total number of transactions means it could be cash deposit or cash deposit. So per month per given account ID, only 5. If you're crossing more than that, then the transaction will not be stopped, but 50 penalty will be debited. Total cash withdrawals allowed in a day is 50,000 bucks. When this is exceeded, a charge of 1% on extra amount is to be debited as a penalty. So all these are triggers only that you need to implement. Okay. So all these are triggers that you need to write. And remaining things are primary keys, foreign keys, and check consent. And this is not a case study at all. It is a project. Indian project is a case. It is a project that you can work on. It will give you much more learnings. So people would ask you, tell me one example, where did you implement a trigger? So you can give this kind of an examples to the interviewer. Clear? So we will be writing those triggers, no worries. So there are two types of triggers available in your SQL server. One is called DDL trigger. The next one is called DML trigger. So we never work on the DDL trigger. So it is for the tables. It is for the schema purpose. Okay. We never work on the DDL triggers. We work on DML triggers. So inside DML triggers, there are again two types of triggers. One is called after. It is also called as a for trigger. The next one is called instead of trigger. Clear? So one is called after trigger. The second one is called instead of trigger. So we are going to be using only DML, data manipulation language trigger. We are not going to be writing DDL triggers, data definition language triggers. These are recently added. Recently means I think in 2005. But in RDBMS only, when the RDBMS concept is invented in 1970s, there were only DML triggers. Okay, so no question of DDL triggers there. So recently Oracle guys and the SQL Server guys added, and this concept is DDL triggers are not available as part of RDBMS when they invented in 1970s. Clear? But they had DML triggers for some kind of an automations and validations. Clear? Now, when does a trigger fire? During DML operations, insert, update, delete happens. Can I call the trigger explicitly? No. Trigger cannot be created on a column, so it can be created on a table. Truncate does not invoke a trigger. Truncate means you're going to be deleting all the data from the table, right? So that's when. So this is how you're going to be creating a trigger. So trigger name, on which table you wanted to create a trigger, and what is the type of the trigger. So type means I'm talking about these two triggers, after or instead of. These are the type of the triggers. You can give the name, right? So in after trigger, so it has to be fired when there is insert, comma update, comma delete as begin. You write the complete logic here and end and go. So that's it. So if you say insert, if you don't give update and delete, it will get fired during the insert statements. Clear? If you give update, it will get fired during the update. You can give any combinations, insert update only, insert delete only, insert update delete only, insert and delete only. You can give any combinations. You can give one action, two actions, three actions, or all the actions. When should I call my trigger? So you cannot call the trigger, explicitly. So when there is an insert happens in the table, when there is an update happens in the table, when there is a delete happens in the table, trigger gets fired automatically. Clear? You write your code in this. So that is what you should, happen. You have to think about one more thing. magic tables. When we're talking about the triggers, one more concept that should know, magic tables. Okay. Whenever you're inserting the data, whenever you're updating the data, whenever you're deleting the data, a magic tables are going to be created. The table names called as inserted and deleted. Now let us understand what are this. For example, now Sneha has done this and Godofy is also wanted to do something. So Godofy will go to bank and on some date, so October 28th, this guy or 26, this guy is going, he wanted to deposit some cash of $12,000. Clear? And if there's a trigger, if there is a trigger, what happens? Trigger is going to create two magic tables where the magic tables are going to be created inside the RAM. So you assume that this is what is your RAM in your computer, wherever SQL server is, there inside the machine. If the trigger is there, what trigger is going to be creating when the insert is going on? So this is what is the insert, right? This guy is now just now came and deposit immediately. When the insert happens, primary key, foreign key, check consent will happen. Then the triggers will get fired. It will create two tables. One table is called as inserted table, one more table is called as deleted table. Okay, it will create a table called inserted. Table name is called inserted table. Let me, insert a table. So what it will do, it will have the column names and this row. It will be there in this. Remember this. So whenever you insert the data, if there is a trigger is going to be creating two tables. One is called inserted table, and it will create one more table called a deleted table as well. Okay. Inside the delete table, you have the columns, but no data will be there. No data will be there because you have inserted the data. The trigger also will get created. It is going to be keeping the same row in this box where the tables are created inside your RAM. Who's going to be creating? Trigger. Why trigger is creating these two tables? Because trigger wanted to know who's the guy who has done the transaction. That information will be here, because if you go to the table, we don't know whether he's the guy is doing transaction, he's the guy is doing transaction, we don't know. So sometimes you may insert a two rows at a time, sometimes you insert a three rows at a time. So whenever you're inserting during the transaction, what happens? Trigger is going to be getting fired, and these three rows will get inserted here. Clear? So trigger knows that, okay, this is the guy, or these are the three guys who just now came in. So trigger will have a clear picture saying that who's the guy who's doing the transaction. Otherwise, you will have millions of data, and what is the row came in just now, nobody knows about it. Okay, so the table is called inserted table. When you insert, this table gets created, and deleted table also will get created, but no data here. Okay, but if you have, once execution is over, then everything will get deleted. That's it, everything is gone. Everything is gone. So this data also will be going. So trigger knows that this table name is called inserted table. So trigger knows that, okay, 102 is doing the transaction. It will get the information from this table only, and it will go and it will get updates. Clear? So then these two tables will be removed from the RAM. So every time when you insert the data, when you update the data, two tables are going to be created. One table is called inserted table. And when you insert, the data will come here. And in the deleted table, no rows will be there. This is for insert. Clear? If you delete the data, no data will be there. So the deleted rows will come here. But definitely, trigger is going to be creating two tables. One table is called inserted table. One more table is called deleted table. When you update any data, for example, it was 12,000, that you made it to 15,000. By mistake, you have written this. right? So whatever deleted record is 12,000. Okay. The inserted record is 15,000. Clear? Updation is, deletion followed by insertion. That is what is called updation, right? So deleted data will be here, inserted data will be here. So these magic tables are created like this. Clear? When you insert the data, this table is going to be having data. It does not have anything. When you update, new rows will come, old rows will go. When you delete the data from the table, the insert will not have anything, but old rows will be there in this table. So using the magic tables, you can write your programming. So who's the guy who's doing the transaction currently? Whether you inserted these two rows, whether you inserted only this row, that you will have as part of the magic tables only. So magic tables are very, very important. These are there in the RAM. So once the execution is over, magic tables will get disappeared. Okay, because RAM. So when the execution is over, the magic tables are gone. Again, when you insert the new row, magic tables are created. If there is a trigger is going to be creating these two magic table called inserted and deleted, and that we are going to be using in our programming. Clear? Magic tables are used to identify who's the guy who's doing the transaction now. To identify that row, magic tables are very, very helpful for us. Otherwise, we don't know whether these two rows got inserted just now, or this row got inserted, or only these three rows got inserted just now. We don't know. So when you're inserting the data, magic tables are created. This data is going to be placed inside the table. So we'll come to know that, okay, these are the three guys just now inserted data. So for them only, we need to update the values here. Clear? Otherwise, if you think that only this guy is coming and doing, how do you identify whether this guy is coming and doing or this guy is coming and doing? Because if you go to the bank at a time, thousands of people are going to go and doing transactions, right? So who's doing the transaction now? How do you know? So only to that guy you have to, deposit the cash or withdraw the cash every time. When the insert goes in, the trigger will identify that row, and that row will get, okay, will get copied into inserted table. So trigger clearly knows that this is the guy who's doing transaction now. Clear? And it will take fraction of milliseconds to update here and there. Then the inserted table, deleted table will be disappeared. Again, when the trigger gets fired, again you will be able to get insert deleted tables. Because of the magic table, so see, triggers are will becoming slow. Clear? Performance wise, the triggers are very, very bad. Many companies will say don't use triggers, but if you don't use triggers, then you cannot do the validations or validations and complex automations. Clear? Even though triggers are bad for the performance, and we should implement minimum triggers, not maximum triggers, or you can write one or two triggers and implement complete logic in it. Only one or two triggers, it has to take care of all automations, validation jobs. You don't write multiple triggers, then it will be heavy, because each trigger will create inserted table, deleted table, one more trigger again creates one more inserted, one more deleted, so it will take a lot of time. Clear? So if you wanted to implement automation, try to implement the complete logic into one trigger, so that it will create one inserted, one deleted tables, so that you can get the better performance. But definitely triggers are bad for the performance. Not only trigger, we have one more concept called cursor. Okay, what is the cursor? We'll see later, but cursors also will be bad for the performance. We try to minimize the cursors, try to minimize the triggers as part of our SQL development. Clear? Even though SQL triggers are good for the automation, but creating much more triggers is very, very bad, because if you insert one row, trigger gets fired. If you insert, delete one row, trigger gets fired. If there is a trigger on the table, it will create a lot of tables in your RAM, and putting the data there, it is going to do a lot of circus here and there. Clear? So people may ask you why more triggers are not recommended, because performance wise very bad when you're doing any DML operations. Clear? But without a triggers, can I implement? The answer is no. Triggers are needed to do a lot of automation job. Clear? For example, I'm talking about cash deposit, cash withdrawal, balance availability. All these things should be done by the triggers only. No feature in your SQL can be doing the activity. Okay, so remember this point. Even the triggers are bad, we need to implement them as part of our SQL, and definitely it will give you much more performance issues. Okay, but you need to create not more triggers and minimal. Implement all the logic inside a single one or two triggers or maximum three triggers you can have, not more than that. One for insert, one for update, one for delete. If insert is going on, you write the logic. Update is going on, you write one more trigger in that. If the delete is going on, you write some logic inside that so that you don't get any other complications. Only three triggers per table. I think that is better, but you can create much more triggers. There is no limit. There is no limit at all. So which trigger needs to be fired? People may ask, I have trigger one, trigger two, trigger three. Which trigger has to be fired first? So, however, sequence in which you create, and they're going to be fired like that. If you create a trigger number one first, that will get fired first. Then the second one, then the third one. But I wanted to order my trigger sequence. If you wanted to order that, then there is use SP set a trigger order to order the triggers firing. You need to say trigger number A is the last trigger. You can say trigger name A, then you give the sequence number 3. Trigger number B is the first trigger. So you can say SP set a trigger order, trigger name, comma, order number. Okay, so you can also do that. So if you don't do, which trigger will get fired first and which trigger will get fired last. So order in which you have created, it will take the same order. Clear? But if you wanted to think that I would like to call the some X trigger first, Y trigger later, and the Z trigger later, means you can provide use SP set a trigger order. This is a stored procedure. Using this, you can give the trigger name, then firing a sequence number. That's it. Clear? So that you can do that. So we'll discuss the after trigger and the for trigger tomorrow, and that's it as of now. Clear? So what is the trigger? And we know that there are instead of and after trigger. What is the after trigger? What is the instead of trigger? And how to write the triggers? We'll see them in the tomorrow's class. Thank you guys. Any other questions?